record button. And again, as we go, pop questions in the chat, and I'm going to turn my camera off so you don't have to see my ugly mug on the side of your screen. So again, thanks so much for joining us. And again, we'll have a Q&A towards the end of Lori's presentation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lori Hart. I'm the Director of Educational Initiatives for Holmes Murphy Fraternal Practice, and I am happy to be with you today for you to learn a little bit more about Holmes Murphy, a little bit more about why we need insurance, a little bit more about risk and the role that you play in keeping your members safe and keeping your organization safe. So thanks for being with me today. First and foremost, a little bit about what Holmes Murphy is. Holmes Murphy is an insurance broker. We have 90 plus clients. And what we do as a broker, a lot of people say Holmes Murphy is the insurance provider, and we're really not the provider. We're kind of the group that you go through in order to secure insurance. And so what we do is go out based on your risk, based on your needs, based on what you're doing. We go out and we look for the best insurance provider for those needs. So as a broker, we represent a lot of different umbrella organizations that we are very proud to represent. Every single day as the Director of Educational Initiatives, I get to pick up the phone, I get to answer emails, and I get to work with all different groups of people and clients in order to meet your needs and to work around this lens of safety and how do we do safety in the world of fraternity and sorority. Another question we often get that seems like a basic question, but I think it's important to talk about, like, why do we need insurance? Why do you need insurance? Many of you probably watching this, you are officers or you are volunteers. Maybe you're just a member, as I like to say, that just a member. But regardless of what lens you look through, the reality is that we need insurance for our organizations. We need insurance because colleges and universities require it. We need insurance because it helps us recruit and retain alumni and alumni who are involved in the organization as they have coverage under our policies. It also, insurance protects our undergraduate members when they're acting on behalf of the organization. So when we are doing the right things, when there is an accident, when something happens, you have coverage. And it's also just simply the responsible thing to do, and it helps perpetuate the organization. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I will tell you, operating in universities across the country, we need insurance because the universities are asking for it and they're looking for it as a part of the undercurrent of how and why we can exist on those campuses. At Holmes Murphy, we provide a lot of different types of insurance based on the needs of the client and the organization. Some of the basic terms that we will talk about, and your organization may or may not have all of these, but for the most part, we offer general liability coverage to all of our clients, directors and officers liability. Some of our clients have a thing called membership accident protection program, and we also offer crime insurance. So I'm going to jump into those just a little bit self-explanatory, but let's see if you understand what they are. Who's covered under this policy? First of all, the national organization is covered, the National International Fraternity or Sorority, the directors, the officers, the staff members, the appointed volunteers while they're performing services in their positions. So if you're a volunteer and you happen to be at a Rotary Club meeting and an accident happens, you're not covered. But if you are operating in the volunteer capacity of the organization, there's coverage. Also, who's covered is our local alumni and alumni, our undergraduate chapters and colonies recognized by the national organization, our undergraduate chapter officers and the advisors, and our active members and candidates for membership. So all of these people are covered. What is not covered and who is not covered, it's any loss falling outside the scope of the policy. So again, you're at the Rotary Club meeting, something happens, you're not going to be covered under this policy. Who's also and what's also not covered is any member who's illegally or unintentionally or intentionally doing activities to result in the death or an injury to someone. Also, any individual involved in an activity excluded within the terms of the policy. Each policy has terms, each policy has exclusions. The reality is each policy looks just a little bit different as we look client to client. Who's also not covered? Members' parents, family members, guests are not covered. And also the college and university administration is not covered. So this coverage is essentially, if that helps you, put it in the sandbox, it covers the organization, national, international organization, the chapters, the officers, the alumni operating in volunteer capacities, and also the members operating in the correct capacities. When we think about what causes claims, a lot of people have thoughts about claims. And I think this is just a really good snapshot of what causes the general liability claims. Now, I'd like to say what causes claims is also not necessarily what happens every single day. It's just this is kind of the story that we can tell based on the claims that we see. Based on what we see as it relates to when people file claims, leading causes fall around slip and falls, hazing, auto accidents, alcohol abuse, alcohol misuse, sexual assault, assault and batteries. And so these are in no particular order, but those tend to be the common themes. The other piece that we look at as it relates to the common themes is 90 to 95% of our claims involve alcohol at some level, regardless of the umbrella organization, regardless of NALFO, NAPA, NMGC, regardless of NPC, NIC, regardless of what umbrella organization you may or may not be a part of. The reality is that alcohol is at the undercurrent of our undergraduate claims as we see them come in. So while there might be a hazing claim, the undercurrent is often alcohol. While there might be a sexual assault claim, undercurrent is often in alcohol misuse and abuse. So the general liability policy, who is not covered? This is a tough one. I think sometimes because students are like, what do you mean I'm not covered? What do you mean I'm not covered? The reality is the coverage exists for the national organization, for the chapter, for our volunteers, for our officers and members. But if you are operating outside the scope of the policy, if you are in the basement hazing someone, if you are physically assaulting, abusing someone, if you are sexually assaulting someone, if you are providing alcohol to minors, there won't be coverage to the people who are doing that. The people operating inside the scope of the policy and the rules and the expectation, there will be coverage afforded to them. But if you are violating rules and policies, you can't expect that the coverage is going to cover you when something happens. Directors and officers coverage. This is, again, for our volunteers. These are the people doing the work and our staff that are doing the work. And the coverage is recognized to collegiate chapters and colonies, the housing corporations and associations, chapter-related educational foundations. It's really around the claims for failure or negligence in carrying out fiduciary duties, employment claims around discrimination, harassment, and wrongful termination. The next piece of our work is around crime insurance. This is our coverage for claims around the theft by employees and volunteer officers of the organizations. Simple examples: embezzlement, disappearance of money or checks, thefts of monies by members or housing corporation officers, and the unknown cause for disappearance of money. We are continuing to see an increase in crime and embezzlement and theft of money coming straight out of housing corporation funds or coming out of chapters. And so when we think about prevention, and we'll jump into some prevention in just a little bit, really thinking about who has access to this, what are the checks and balances, and who's controlling, and making sure that there's a lot of eyes on the money. Membership accident protection program is not every client has this, but really quickly for our clients who do have membership accident protection program. This is what I call like the AFLAC of insurance. This is for, if you're familiar with AFLAC, this is for anything in addition to. Membership accident claims, their coverage is afforded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. Certainly there's exclusions just as in any policy, but this really is a medical benefit for up to $100,000 and $5,000 of death and dismemberment benefit. So if anything happens, if you are a member in good standing with the organization and you are enrolled at the host institution, if you're a good member, you're enrolled, something happens, your insurance, your personal insurance is going to kick in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Doesn't matter if you're on campus, off campus. But let's say that your insurance, you have all these out-of-pocket expenses for something, $20,000 of out-of-pocket expenses. Membership accident protection program exists for you to possibly be reimbursed for those expenses. So anytime someone in your chapter has an accident, you look around, you're like, how'd you break your arm? What happened to you? What's going on? Membership accident protection will be the place where you want to kick in and say, hey, here's a brochure, here's a phone number, pick up the phone, and let's see if there's coverage for that. It does not have to be at an event of the organization. It's, again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So the number one question that I hear as a director of educational initiative is, how do we reduce our insurance payment? insurance costs too much. I don't care if I'm talking to an average student, if I'm talking to an officer, if I'm talking to an executive director, a CEO of an organization. The key thing when they work with Holmes Murphy is, how do we reduce this? This costs a lot of money. And I don't disagree with that. I spent the majority of my career for 15 years working for a men's national fraternity. I came on after a fraternity-related death around a new member. Soon after, we had another fraternity-related death, both of them circling around new member events, hazing, common source alcohol, like a lot of the same common factors that were in place. At that point, our insurance started to do this. And at that point, we also recognized we had a safety issue and we had some safety challenges. We as an organization did a lot of work. And to say a lot of work, we did a lot of work. We did a strategic plan. We engaged volunteers. We engaged experts. We started training the trainers and really bringing our volunteers in and working with them. We brought our members in. We went on the road with our volunteers, and we really got this safety message out there. And I will tell you, within a few solid years, we saw our claims go down. We saw safer events. We saw safer members. We saw a safer experience. And we also saw our insurance rate go down. So I don't just tell you, I'm not just on the screen to say, be safer. It works. It actually does work. I've seen it work. And I have seen it when organizations put energy into this, when the volunteers put energy into this, when we put time and effort and money, and when the students actually try and the members try, and we buy into a shared purpose, we can actually keep members safer, and I think we can actually reduce. So I want to spend some time talking about that. In the world of fraternity and sorority, there will always be risk. There will always be risk. In the world of sorority and fraternity, it's never going to go away. Just by the nature of so many of our clients having undergraduate chapters and graduate chapters, alumni chapters, by the fact that we gather, by the fact that we are social, by the fact that alcohol is at a lot of our common events together, by the fact that we have intake and recruitment processes to bring people in, we recognize at Holmes Murphy there's going to be risk. And we don't try to shy away from it. We don't encourage our clients to just simply policy it to death. Because in the world of risk, what we often hear people do is just don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and nothing changes. What we do every single day at Holmes Murphy is we look at risk and we try to approach it from the lens of the ART method. The ART method has been around in Holmes Murphy for several years, 5 or 6 years. And what we do when we are provided risk, when risk is in front of us, we know that there's a framework for how to understand risk. And what we do every single day is we take that risk and we think about ways to avoid, we think about ways to reduce, and we think about ways to transfer. And it is culturally who we are and what we do in Holmes Murphy. And so as I think about how we can help members, how we can help students, how we can help our alumni and our alumni and our graduate chapters and alumni chapters, it's really about teaching you how do you, when risk is approaching you, what is your system and framework for how you think about that? So here's kind of a breakdown of what this looks like. Avoid. Avoid is the prevention piece. Avoid also might be the elimination piece. But when risk comes at you, we can choose to avoid it by doing some work and preventing it, by possibly eliminating it. We could do some reduce work. And what reduce is we're going to take that same risk coming at us and we're going to figure out ways to actually minimize the risk. And the transfer piece is simply figuring out how to transfer that risk elsewhere. The risk goes absolutely somewhere else. And so I'm going to break down these 3 things. And as I do this, I think the key thing for you listening, for you watching, for you paying attention is, what are those risks that you have as a member, as an officer, as a volunteer, as a staff member? What are those risks that you think are common, that are coming at you? And what can you systematically do in order to avoid, reduce, and to transfer? So avoid. This is the big place of prevention. I have made a career believing in the science of prevention. And I do believe of anything that I say today, the more that we work with each other to think about how to prevent risk, I think the more that we can mitigate risk. I know that the average member in an organization, it's not that you don't know the risk is there. You know the risk is there. So what do you do with it, and how do you actually prevent it? So some prevention ideas, and these are just ideas based on the common risk that we see. Number one, first and foremost, take time to plan the event. At Holmes Murphy, at the end, we're going to show you a website. And in this website, there's going to be event planning guides. There are going to be how to host events, how to do safer events, how to have events at third-party vendors, how to execute contracts. You are not without resources on how to plan the event. But planning the event with a group text of a social chairman 6 houses down the way without meeting, without thinking about it, without talking about it, is usually not going to serve you well. The next piece of avoid is sometimes canceling the event is necessary. There were often many times when I worked for the Men's National Fraternity where I would see something on social media and it was a big outrageous party. And my first question was, or my first call was always to the chapter president. And my first question was like, are you aware? Are you aware? And the reality is, if you're a chapter president listening, you know this. Sometimes things just spiral while you're at a 2-hour lab. And all of a sudden you leave and you're like, what's happening? The best leaders I've ever seen are those leaders who choose to cancel events, who choose to just say, nope, this is not going to work. This is risky. This is not how we're supposed to be doing things. And sometimes you just have to be bold to say, we're going to cancel that event. The other things around avoiding that you can do is educating the members on the policy and the plan. The members don't need to know nitty-gritty details. They don't need to know every single rule. They don't care. In all fairness, they elect officers to execute the event. So executing the event is going to be important, but also understanding and educating our members on when you come to the event, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what we expect of you. Here's what we expect of our guests. Here's what we expect of event monitors. And so really helping them understand what the plan looks like before they actually get there. And that leads also to some basic event monitors. Having event monitors, no, it's not a policy, but event monitors are a really good prevention tool in order for you to see the risk, intervene with risk, and hopefully mitigate that risk. But also training event monitors. Again, Holmes Murphy has some great event monitor training resources on our website. How do you train those people? And also having an officer in charge. And by officer, I mean a sober officer. I mean someone who is substance free. How do you have someone at your event who is in charge of the event, who is running the event, and who is executing the event? Also, when we think around prevention, utilizing appropriate themes, which aren't sexist, which aren't racist, which aren't homophobic, like how do we create appropriate themes in order to prevent things from happening? Themes often dictate outcomes. I hate to say that. I'm a product of the 70s and my college experience was in the 80s and 90s. And our themes dictate what and how we do things. So part of prevention is thinking through every single detail about the theme of the event, the music of the event, what we're expecting of people at the event, in order to really find the gaps of how do we create safer spaces. That's how to avoid risk. How do you reduce risk? Reducing risk sometimes means that you're just going to change the location or change the timing of the event. It's really just our ability to think outside the box. Dr. Lewin told us in 1936, our behavior is a function of the people we hang out with and the environments that we hang out with. In our organizations, there are usually a lot of good people, and usually there's a lot of good environments, but sometimes there's some higher risk people and some higher risk environments. Sometimes what we need the leadership to do is simply think about changing location, changing the time of the event, and how you do that. Also, really thinking through what is the problem. You know risk is coming, and it's really going into the undercurrents of what is actually causing the problem. And maybe the problem is some of the members. Maybe the problem is the time, the alcohol, the location. Maybe it's the theme. Really thinking through, why am I concerned about this? Is it history? Is it tradition? Have you watched history and traditions get worse? Like thinking through the undercurrents of it. And then how do you go in and tweak the source of the problem? The next thing to do is don't let people in that don't need to be there. And this is wildly unpopular and crazy. But a lot of times, as I said, good chapters, good organizations, but there's a few people causing the problems. If you are trying to minimize risk and you're trying to get into the undercurrent and understand what's causing the problems, if all of a sudden you go, my gosh, it's always the same 3 people. It's always the same 3 people causing the problem. And you have an event coming up. And you want to have the event, and your members want to have the event. Sometimes it's just okay to say to the 3 people, you can't come. You don't need to be here. you're not going to be here. Or at least say to them, here's what we expect of you if you come. And somebody is watching and monitoring that. We have seen so many good things go really, 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 really bad when we knew the people in the room who were the problems and we simply didn't do anything. The next is to engage the adults to assist. There are a lot of people championing for your success. There are a lot of people championing for fraternities and sororities to thrive and to do well and to be great things. And there's a lot of adults, and I use the word adults, out there. Adults come in the form of Holmes Murphy. Adults come in the form of your national, international headquarters. Adults come in the form of advisors and volunteers. Advisors come in the form of housing corporations if you have them. Advisors are your fraternity and sorority life professionals. All too often, though, if you're the student sitting here, I hear students say, I don't like my headquarters. They don't understand. I don't like my FS. I don't like this person. Like, here's the deal. If you've created a wall and everyone's the enemy, we really can't help you. My challenge to you is to think about one or two adults that you will engage with, one or two people that you will commit to calling, that fostering a relationship with. And hopefully it might be a chapter advisor you have a great relationship with. But if you don't, if you're like, we don't even have a chapter advisor, okay. But maybe you have a campus professional that you have a great relationship with. Maybe you're willing to pick up the phone and call your headquarters. At some point, involve the adults in a conversation, the old people, the adults. And also sometimes minimizing risk is simply inviting the advisor to the event, having the seasoned person in the room, having the person in the room who just their presence alone might help minimize some risk in situations where we need adult presence. Transfer. This means the risk goes elsewhere. This is some simple places of making sure our contracts are equitable and fair. This is thinking about moving the event from the unofficial annex and the unofficial fraternity and the unofficial sorority event. This is about moving it to a third-party vendor and simply transferring the risk to a licensed and insured third-party vendor. This is thinking about, instead of saying everybody just get to the event, hiring licensed and insured transportation, having a licensed and insured provider of alcohol. This is about how do we transfer risk by involving companies, organizations, entities that are licensed and insured that can help host the event and help transfer some of that risk to that group. So that's ART, avoid, reduce, and transfer. My hope for you, my challenge for you is, as I've given you these three ways of thinking and these three simple ideas, that you will think about some upcoming risk, that you will think about some upcoming events, that you will think about those few nights that keep you awake, those things that you're like, oh, this worries me. It's always been done this way. It's risky. Like, when you think through those things, instead of just going, oh, well, good luck, like, instead of doing that, how do you think through avoiding, reducing, and transferring? So here are some thoughts to complement ART. Number one, you're not alone. I said it a minute ago. I'm going to say it again. There are so many people championing for the success of fraternities and sororities in this world. There are headquarters and volunteers and Holmes Murphy. There are campus professionals. There are mental health people on your campus. There are counseling centers. There are Title IX offices. There are all of these people who want members in fraternities and sororities to thrive, to succeed, to graduate, and to go change the world. But fraternities and sororities, whether you're a graduate chapter or undergraduate chapter, you don't succeed in a silo. And so my challenge to you is to recognize that you're not alone. My challenge to you is to think about who will you involve in the conversation and how will you bring other voices to the table as you do your work as a chapter. Next, I'm going to tell you to know your policy. I actually love to talk about policy because I think and when we think about our policies, the undercurrent of policies, the reality is the undercurrent is safety. We want people to be safe. Why policies become policies is because oftentimes a lot of people, a lot of groups, think there's a group of people who violated a rule. And because they violated this thing, we make a policy to say, don't do that. So a lot of policies feel kind of like don't. In the world of fraternity and sorority, we have a couple of basic policies that your national, international organization likely is following. Number one, we have policies around alcohol. Alcohol is a legal substance in the United States and Canada, and in those places and spaces, we are allowed to have policies on how to manage alcohol at our events. Know your policies around that. Hazing, sexual misconduct, assault and battery. We have a lot of policies that you will see around those things that essentially just say, here's what it is, don't do it, and this is including but not limited to. We do a lot of like defining it, prohibiting it, and saying don't do that. Sexual misconduct, assault and battery, hazing, in all fairness, the undercurrent of those things is violence. So the policies really are just don't do those things. Most organizations have retaliation policies that prohibit you from going against people who are actually trying to support and do the right thing as it relates to student safety, member safety. If you have not read your policy, that is your homework. If you can't find your policy, that is a problem. If your organization can't help you find your policy, that is a problem. But we cannot do this work until you are familiar with the playbook, until you're familiar with the policies, until you know what is actually expected of you. And the next piece of this, which doesn't get a lot of press time as it relates to avoid, reduce, and transfer, but I think this is one of the critical ones where we can all up our game. This is around this place of well-executed contracts. Now, note that this slide doesn't just say, have a contract, because the reality is there's a lot of bad contracts out there. The reality is we can try to transfer risk to going to a bus company, but if you don't have a contract, if you don't verify that they are licensed and insured, you just happen to be going to Tom's Bus to rent Tom's bus and there's no insurance. If you're going to do the work of transferring risk, you got to do the work of really figuring out well-executed contracts. Now, saying that, I don't expect the average person listening to know how to do a contract. And so a couple of points that I want you to take and I want you to remember. Number one, read the contract. If you don't understand it, that's a sign that maybe I shouldn't just sign this right away. You can send your contract to Holmes Murphy for recommendations. We don't mandate things around contracts, but we will certainly give you recommendations and advice. You can also send it to, if you have regional volunteers, headquarters people, like there usually is a chain of command within the organizations around how they handle contracts and how they give you feedback. If if you have a parent who happens to be a divorce attorney, that's great, but you're not getting divorced here. You're trying to sign a contract for your fraternity and sorority. So I'm very leery of you just why did an attorney look at it? Attorneys do different work. So we prefer that you keep this within your organization, keep this within Holmes Murphy so we can help you and give you guidance. It is recommended that the chapter president execute the contract. We've seen a lot of bad situations where the presidents just say to the member, go get a venue, and all of a sudden just average Joe member is signing his, her, their life away, and it's not pretty if something happens. So really appoint chapter leadership to do this work. All contracts should be executed in the chapter name of the organization. No one at the undergraduate level is authorized to sign a contract in the name of the national organization. Absolutely no one. You may be authorized to sign for your chapter. So when you are signing, it's going to be the alpha beta chapter of XYZ organization. And then as you read through the contracts, what we would do at Holmes Murphy, or what someone at your headquarters or a volunteer might look at, is, can you actually meet the insurance requirements? If they're requiring $10 million of general liability coverage and you don't have $10 million, there's no need to sign that. It wouldn't be equitable. We're also going to look at the terms and are they equitable and work on behalf of the organization executing. And also we're going to look at indemnification, hold harmless language. So if none of that makes sense to you, the good news is don't just go and run and sign contracts. Do the due diligence to get them reviewed and do the due diligence for you to make sure that they're equitable for you, for the organization, and for your chapter and national, international organization. The next thing I'm going to tell you is to hold your members accountable. This is the number one statement that I hear members say: hold your members accountable. If I were in live person and we were talking and I would say, what do you think we should do? The number one answer is hold members accountable. Now here's our reality. We cannot hold members accountable unless our chapters understand the accountability process. Every single client of ours has a different accountability process. Every single client does it different. But our clients do have resources. Our clients, the fraternities and sororities, they do have resources. They do have protocols, procedures. They have guidance. and some of them very, very specific about how accountability measures are done within the organization. So it's important for you to know your policy, right? It's important to know that. But also, if an individual violates that said policy, how do you hold people accountable? And if you don't know that, if you don't know the process, then it's really hard to say, don't hold people accountable or do hold people accountable. What I tend to see, these are just kind of lost words. We're going to hold people accountable, hold them accountable. We never do. And then we kind of lose the respect of the chapter and they run with it. And then we're just frustrated and tired. Have expectations, hold members accountable. Holmes Murphy has a lot of resources. When I say to you that you are not alone, Holmes Murphy has a lot of resources around the few topics that I've just talked about. I would encourage you to go to holmesmurphyfraternal.com. We will have on there, if you go under event planning, we have an event, like something for everything: how to do BYOB, how to build a guest list, how to do event monitoring, how to do a participation release form if that's what you're into, how to do party themes that are respectful of all, looking at what constitutes the event. What constitutes the event? And certainly when we are thinking about events, if you are finding yourself doing, well, this is the unofficial, unregistered event at the unofficial house and we're drinking in the unofficial car, trust me, that's an event. That's a claim. It's going to happen. So what we want you to do is to move things into, if this is an event, how do we do that? What constitutes an event is a great resource to do that. Also, if you go to the App Store on your phone, go to the App Store and download HM, capital H, capital M, Event Planner. This is our event planning contract that will be sitting in an application format for you to plan an event, a safe event with or without alcohol. So you're not without resources. I hope these resources complement the national, international organization that you are a part of, and knowing those resources are going to be critical as well. And finally, this sounds so basic, but I think this is what needs to be said over and over and over again in the work that we do. There's always going to be risk. There's always going to be risk in the world of sorority and fraternity. And if something happens, the only thing I need you to remember is to call 911. And when we think about creating a culture of care, because a lot of organizations around our culture and how do we change our culture and how do we do this work correctly, the key thing is that every single member, all the time, regardless of what kind of member you are, regardless of what kind of event you're hosting, we need to be saying out loud proudly, if something happens, we need to call 911. When we look at headlines, and these are not all Holmes Murphy clients, when we look at headlines of people who have lost their lives, when we look at college students who have lost their lives, when you really dig into that undercurrent, so many of them did not get immediate medical attention. So if we can do anything well, if we can do anything right, if risk happens, pick up the phone and call 911. Don't Google, don't second guess it. Just make sure that people get the help they needed if something happens. Thank you for being with me today. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been useful. My email is at the bottom. I would encourage you, if you have any specific questions around resources, around contracts, around things that I might have said to pique your interest, please feel free to email me. And we are happy to work with you at Holmes Murphy, and we're happy to partner with you. I wish you a successful conference, event, wherever you are, and thank you for the opportunity to serve you.
All right, thanks so much for that presentation from Dr. Lori Hart and Holmes Murphy. So we had a lot of great questions come into the chat while that was happening. Please feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat. I'm going to open it up here for Brandon to answer any additional questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask them out that way, or again in the chat. Brandon, anything that you want to, add on to with the questions that we had, or additional information that you'd like to provide?
We can just run through them real quick if you want. So when we're talking about crime, checks and balances, that's the main thing, is just, don't let somebody have complete authority over cash and debit accounts. And if you can, change passwords, change roles as much as you can. That's where sometimes I see folks having problems if someone's been appointed for 2, 3, 4 years to the same thing. No one's been keeping check on them. Member accident.
I was going to add on to that, Brandon, one of some of the checks that you had put in there, such as a 2-signer system, that is part of our national policies as well. So sure that we do signers on an account, one that is the chapter president, and one that is not the vice president of finance. The VP of finance does keep the records. They are not to be a signer per our national policies on the checking savings accounts.
There you go. You guys have a lot of guests. So, if they go and get injured on their own, right, that's going to be their own health insurance or liability insurance. However, if they are, en route to one of your meetings, if they get injured walking up the stairs to your meeting, then, if they wanted to file a liability claim, they would be covered. And so that is sometimes guests do ask about that. You guys have insurance? And you say, yes, and it's good insurance and it will provide them coverage if anything were to happen. And just if want to know how a claim would work, they need to file a claim and they would explore and see if that's something that you guys were responsible for, but know that would be covered if there's anything. The member accident policy, that DSP does a really good job. They're one of the few that actually purchase coverage for advisors, if anyone here isn't under that. And so if there is an injury, then that's a benefit of you guys giving your time and volunteer efforts. Feel free to reach out to headquarters and see if there's anything that would be covered under that. And then it's something that I think should be at least understood, maybe not communicated to all undergraduate members, but understood that if somebody says that I was injured and you're thinking about it, that it might be something that is involved with DSP, that that MAP claim is there for that. And that's kind of twofold. For one, it's there as a benefit of membership, but also to sometimes stop from having further litigation. If a lot of times if folks and their parents are comfortable just having their bills paid, then they don't continue with lawsuits, which none of us want. Another question was Uber Lyft as a licensed and insured transportation. Yes, that is, and so that's one of the benefits of living in 2021 is that there are ways to get rides that are not our members. So Uber and Lyft would count. Let's see what else. I think that's good. Tyler, unless anybody else wants to speak up, I think we're probably okay.
All right. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, pop them in the chat, raise your hand. We'll get to you. Just a couple of things from the chat that I pointed out here from the fraternity side of things. Anybody that has questions about contracts, those can absolutely can and should be reviewed by our Assistant Executive Director for Events and Education, Shanda Gray. She can be, those can be forwarded to her at Shanda, SHANDA, at dsp.org. Questions about our policy, making claims, things like that from the fraternity side of things, and she will also get in contact with Holmes Murphy, and particularly Brandon can go to our Senior Director of Finance, Gina Tipton, and she can be reached at Gina, Jenna, at dsp.org. And then when it comes to interpreting our risk management policy, for the most part, you can always reach out to me, Tyler Havens, Director of Chapter Services. My email is a little bit different. It's Havens, it's my last name, HAVENS, at dsp.org. That's available to you as well. And I can connect with Brandon and through Gina or directly, whatever the situation might warrant. So again, I'd give you one last call for any questions from anyone. All right, seeing none, I want to thank Brandon so much for his time this evening in chatting with all of you and answering your questions. Brandon, please also thank Dr. Lori Hart for that presentation as well. We will get this posted up on dsp.org for you all. And thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. We appreciate the time. Any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tyler and crew.
Thanks.